The legal career of Alan Dershowitz spans more than half a century. A constitutional scholar, one of the most respected names in law, his diverse body of work and willingness to tackle controversial cases have cemented his status as a leading legal mind in the U.S., as well as all over the world. I want you to welcome to our show the author of this book called Get Trump, also host of his own podcast, The Dershow, Alan Dershowitz. Great to have you here, Professor.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate your welcoming me, and I appreciate your showing me this beautiful part of America.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to have you here in Nashville. You know, this is a beautiful place, but right now Israel is not so pretty. You and I have an affection and a love for the Israel people, the state of Israel. You're Jewish, I'm evangelical, but we share that common bond. I know it breaks your heart to see the attacks, the cowardly attacks, on the people of Israel.
The immediate victims were these poor children, the mothers, the grandmothers, but the ultimate victims are all good people, all Americans, Judeo-Christian values. That's what's under attack. This is a war between decency and barbarism. I'm not talking about the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
They should be saved from Hamas and allowed to live in peace. I'm talking about these people from Hamas that raped, and these people at Harvard who support the rapists. Can you imagine them supporting rapists in any other context?
I cannot. You taught there for many years, one of the most distinguished professors of law anywhere. Your career at Harvard was stellar. Are you shocked by what you're seeing at the campus?
You know what it reminds me of? I remember reading about a Jewish professor in Berlin who loved to teach German students, and then he was taken into the gas chambers by one of his own students 10 years later. When I think of my students who I taught, I labored over, I loved them, I wrote them recommendations, and then they write a petition saying it's all Israel's fault. Imagine if I had students who were in the Ku Klux Klan and they said, oh, those black people who were lynched, it was their fault, or those women who were raped, it was their fault, or the people who were shot in the street, it was their fault. That's what these students were saying. And I said to myself, I taught them for 50 years. What has gone wrong?
It must be a little comforting to see that many of the high-dollar donors to schools like Harvard and Penn and others are saying, we're not giving any more money unless you stand against this.
Non-Jews as well as Jews.
Yes.
Huntsman, a Mormon, has said that. Many other people, they've said, look, we have a lot of places to give our money to. We've given it to Harvard and Yale and other schools, but look what they've turned out. There has to be a reckoning. When George Floyd was killed, and it was horrible, one man filled with drugs, long history of crime, one man is killed, what happens? A major reckoning at every American, not only university, media company, corporation. Admission standards changed, the curriculum changed. We need a reckoning by universities about their attitude toward Jews, toward Judeo-Christian values, toward America, toward patriotism. We need a reckoning, and until that reckoning comes, we must stop supporting those schools financially.
I could not agree more, and I think it's obvious that our audience recognizes what you just said was profoundly important for America to hear. When I see these folks parading in the streets and blaming Israel for the hospital explosion, which clearly Israel did not do, and even when the evidence reveals that they didn't, these people don't retract their statement.
I bet you that there's not a single person who's marching against Israel today who marched or protested when Hamas killed the 1,300 people. They're not there for human rights. They're not there to protect civilians. They're there to attack Israel. And what worries me is how we have taught our students to believe obvious lies from Hamas, obvious lies about everything. If you can't trust evidence, if you can't trust the New York Times is still talking about this being a two-sided issue. It's not a two-sided issue. The earth, ladies and gentlemen, is actually round. And Elvis Presley, tragically, is no longer alive. And Islamic Jihad bombed that hospital. Israel had nothing to do with it. The evidence shows it from satellite photography, from wiretaps, you name it. Every bit of evidence points to Islamic Jihad. We know exactly how it happened. And yet, the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, initially blamed it on Israel. The New York Times blamed it on Israel. Human Rights Watch, the former head of Human Rights Watch, a Jew named Roth, blamed it on Israel. These folks come in with a narrative. They come in with such a deeply felt anti-Jewish, anti-American attitude that nothing you can tell them will change their mind. And that is a terrible foretaste of what our future leaders are going to be, because these kids are our future leaders. 10 years from now, they're going to run the New York Times. They're going to be in Congress. We already have 4 or 5 certifiable idiots in Congress on the Democratic side calling themselves the Squad. They're not the Squad. They are a bunch of bigots. They are a bunch of people who do not understand truth, and yet they're elected by their constituents. Hopefully, people will run against them. I will support people who run against them.
And I will too. Professor, I don't understand the irrational animosity toward Jews. I don't get it. I have zero animosity. I have nothing but deep appreciation, not just for the nation of Israel, but for the Jewish people who have given us so much in terms of the law.
Including Jesus and Christianity.
I wouldn't be who I am without the Jewish faith upon which my faith is completely built.
Do you know what Bill Clinton said to Yasser Arafat one day? Arafat said in a meeting with Clinton, the Jews never had a temple in Jerusalem, and Clinton stopped him and said, you're telling me that my religion is false. Where did Jesus throw out the moneylenders? Where did the crucifixion occur? You're telling me Jews never were in Jerusalem? If you ever say that again, don't come back into my office. And finally, Arafat said, all right, I won't do that. But thank God for evangelical Christians. They have been so supportive, so principled, so fair when it comes to Israel. They care about civilians as much as anyone else, but they have moral clarity. You know, 15 years ago, I wrote a book called Moral Clarity, and it had a cartoon that could be in a book today. It shows an Israeli fighter protecting a baby carriage, and then a Hamas fighter using the baby carriage to protect him. It's called the CNN strategy, or I hate to say this, the dead baby strategy. What happens is Hamas knows that if they kill Israeli civilians and then use their own civilians as human shields, Israel is going to have to respond to rockets being fired from a hospital or behind a hospital. And they know that inevitably, no matter how much care Israel takes, and it warns people, it does everything in advance, there'll be a couple of small number of innocent civilians killed, including perhaps some babies. They are waiting with CNN cameras to carry out that dead baby. And the world doesn't say to the people who are carrying them out, yeah, we hate the fact that babies are being killed, but you, Hamas, killed them.
Exactly.
You held them as human shields. You know, if I go into a bank and rob a bank, and I hold a hostage, and I start shooting and killing people in the bank, and then a policeman tries desperately to stop me from shooting and accidentally kills the hostage, who's guilty under American law of murder? The person who took the hostage, not the policeman. And that's what's happening in Israel today.
I hope that people are hearing clearly what you're saying, because it makes a whole lot more sense than we're getting out of our national media and from some politicians in Congress. Professor, one of the books you've recently written is called Get Trump. And a lot of people are going to be surprised that you wrote the book. You're not a Trump supporter. You're not a Republican, never have been. But there were some things that you have seen in the treatment of him that disturbed you as a law professor and a constitutionalist.
Well, more than disturbed me. Look, most of the people I've represented in the past in politics, Ted Kennedy, Bill Clinton, have been Democrats, Alan Cranston from California. But what I saw happening to Donald Trump, who I did not vote for, the impeachment was based on unconstitutional criteria. Now they have 4 criminal and 1 civil charge against them. Not a single one warrants being brought. The evidence isn't there. The law isn't there. Where did I get my title, Get Trump? I didn't make it up. It was the campaign pledge of the Attorney General of New York running in the Democratic primary and then running in the general election, saying, my promise to you, the anti-Trump voters of New York, 75% voted against them, My promise to you is I will get Trump. We never want to live in a country where prosecutors target people first and then get the evidence. That's Stalin's Soviet Union, where Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, said to Stalin, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And Justice Robert Jackson, who was our chief prosecutor at Nuremberg, said that any good prosecutor can rummage through the books and find something that a political opponent did. That's not the American way.
Is it disturbing, Professor, that the current Justice Department under the Biden administration is largely behind a special prosecutor? I mean, I can't even imagine how inappropriate it seems that a person who is in office would use the power of all of the agencies of the federal government to target his likely political opponent in an upcoming political race.
If you're going to target your political opponent and avoid being a banana republic, it better be the strongest case in American history. And when the first prosecution against Trump, the first one by the district attorney of Manhattan, turned out to be something I never heard of. I've been practicing criminal law 60 years. They just made it up. You know what they charged them with? They said, look, you had an affair, an adulterous affair. He denies it. That's not relevant. You had an adulterous affair, and you paid hush money, perfectly legal. And then you didn't disclose your payment of hush money on a corporate form? That's a crime. That would have put Alexander Hamilton in prison.
And we wouldn't have had that great musical, would we?
That's right.
And, you know, this has really been decided. The John Edwards case was basically this case, but it was thrown out.
The Edwards case was much stronger than this one. This one isn't even close. This one, they had to make up the law. They had to make up the facts. And if this were tried in any fair district, if this were tried down here in Nashville, the jury would have quit in 15 minutes.
So Donald Trump has some serious legal obstacles in front of him.
He does. Given
the jury makeup in D.C., New York, and for that matter, the judge in Florida, who is no fan of his, or Georgia, I mean.
Georgia.
It's very possible he could end up getting convicted.
Oh, he will get convicted. Let me make a prediction here. I've made many predictions. In my book, Get Trump, I made many predictions, all of which have come true. Why do my predictions come true and CNN's don't? Because CNN engages in wishful thinking. They don't predict. I base it on my professional experience without regard to what outcome I want. I don't want Trump to be convicted. I think he will be convicted by a New York jury, by a D.C. jury, and by a Fulton County jury. Maybe not in Palm Beach County. I'm not sure about that. But there will be some convictions.
So if it happens, what are his chances on appeal that he gets thrown out? Because there you might have some honest lawyers.
Much better, and I think the prosecutors know that. Their strategy is down and dirty, get him convicted before the election, let it influence centrist voters, then it'll be reversed on appeal. Too late. Too late. It won't affect the election because that'll happen after the election. That's why it's important that some of these issues be appealed immediately. For example, a gag order placed on Trump. Look, I would never tell my client to call the prosecutor a thug. I would never do that. It's not smart. But Trump has a constitutional right to say that the person who's prosecuting him, or he believes persecuting him, is a thug. He can protect himself. He can sue. But gag orders make no sense, and they can be appealed. And if a gag order is permitted against Trump, it can be permitted against other defendants as well, and that would trash at least an important part of the First Amendment. But I think Trump has to assume that he will be convicted. If he's convicted in Georgia, there's mandatory prison term. And could you imagine him winning the election and having to go to prison with his Secret Service guards in the jail cell with him, the Oval Office behind bars? I mean, you couldn't even, if I had written a novel and submitted that to a publisher, they would have laughed at it.
They would have said that's not even plausible.
Yeah.
You know, I just...
Well, you want to hear something funny about that?
Sure.
The people from Fauda, which is this great television show about the Israeli military service, they had originally planned to start the next season with an attack on a music festival by Hamas, hundreds of people coming in and killing hundreds of Israelis. What a great beginning for a show. It was rejected on the ground that it couldn't possibly happen.
And now it did. Happened. Alan Dershowitz, it is such a pleasure always to visit with you. I feel like I get smarter just hanging out with you. This book, Get Trump, It's available right now. We'll have a link at Huckabee.tv so that you can get it, and I hope you will. Whether you're a Trump supporter or not, that's not the point. The point is, do you support the Constitution? Do you support the notion that every American ought to be treated the same, whether he's rich, poor, Democrat, Republican, white, black? And I think the answer ought to be a resounding yes. That's why this book is a very important one for all of us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.